Coming up on Over a Barrel.
Folks that are, looking at your computer or your cell phone and listening to this on one of those, make sure you have a little bit of juice here left in your battery. And even for a gasoline analyst, I literally had to go to the EPA's, the Federal Register, to read the exact rule change to understand.
Over a Barrel starts right now. Welcome to the program on Over a Barrel. Matt McLean with you, Patrick DeHaan as well. Make sure you subscribe and or give us a yell. Tell us what some of the things that you would like to talk about. You can reach us at podcast@gasbuddy.com and on Facebook and X at Over a Barrel Show. You can also reach directly out to Patrick on X at GasBuddyGuy or myself on X at Over a Barrel Matt. Well, Patrick, now that I've got all of that out of the way, how are you, sir?
Hey, I'm hanging in there, Matt. Hopefully you are as well amidst gas prices that have recently started to go back up again.
Well, I will at least say this. The gas prices are not fluctuating as much as the air temperatures have over the last several days where I'm at.
Yeah, we got a taste of summer there. At least one, when it comes to temperatures. Thankfully, not the full taste of summer yet at the pump, but yeah, my goodness. Chicago had some bad weather yesterday, and you're down in southern Illinois, Kentucky, and boy, for a couple hours,
we had about a 60-degree drop over the past 24 hours. I was
going to say, for a couple hours, it felt like beautiful summer weather. I mean,
90 degrees, about an hour and a half west of where I'm at. We were in the 80s here, and today we are struggling to get above freezing. So welcome to the upper Midwest / upper South, I should say, / Midwest temperatures, apparently in February. So it's always fun.
And hey, now that's going to segue into temperatures rising at the pump. So
I know that's what makes me so depressed about it.
Well, it is the time of year, and we've kind of run through it time and time again, but it's still here. Some interesting things though, Matt, that have developed over the last week that we can talk about too. I've had a couple folks reach out to me asking about, they had heard something, and maybe there was some confusion about this waiver that's going to happen in 8 states. The Biden administration approving E15, and they were wondering, does that mean the end of the reformulated gasoline or the summer gasoline? So, we can definitely clear up some misconceptions about what those 8 Midwestern states are doing and how it could impact gas prices down the road. But let's start with the nitty gritty on what's up at the pump. Temperatures rising. The national average now about $3.31 a gallon. We are just a penny below what we were a year ago. So we're basically, right about there. Prices now up 23 cents in the last month. As we stand here today, there have been some big price increases throughout the Great Lakes states. We've made the transition, Matt. The first step in the transition to summer gasoline has now happened nationwide. So everyone is going to start filling up with the first step. It's like the lawn fertilizer, right? A 4-step process. It's kind of like the summer gasoline. It doesn't happen overnight, but everyone has made that first step towards summer gasoline.
Absolutely. And I know one of the things that you actually touched on, the E15, I do have questions for that coming down the road. But before we get to that, you're talking about the different price points now. What is it that you are seeing really over the next several days to the next 7 days or so with regard to pricing across the nation?
Well, I think, Matt, most folks are going to be seeing their gas prices inch up. We got a little bit of a break. By the way, last week, we broke the 4-week streak of rising prices. Prices declined last week, but that is going to end, I think. So for most people listening, especially on the West Coast, actually here down in Florida, we did see prices jump back up to $3.39. Most people in most areas are going to see prices inching up. Probably more so, Matt, on the West Coast, the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington, seeing prices jump. If you're a listener in Canada, we saw prices in BC and Vancouver jump. That was related to a Parkland refinery that's really been down for the last couple of months. So, most folks, Matt, that are listening are going to be seeing gas prices inch up. The most common price at the pump is now $3.19. There's only one sub $3 price on that list of most common prices. $2.99 is still the third most common price. But Matt, I've been watching this list of the most common. I watched the 5 most common prices, and the number of prices under $3 has been shrinking. $2.99 is the only sub $3 most common price. And like I said, that's the third most common price. And unfortunately, we're starting to see some $3.29s and $3.39s enter the scene as the most common prices, the fourth and fifth most common. So
I'm seeing $3.09 a lot here in my particular area. I have still seen some $2.99, and I saw one, I believe that was still $2.89, but I figured that was quite short-lived.
Yeah, it's getting less and less common. In fact, looking up the states that have an average below $3 here as we speak, there's only 11 states now with prices that average less than $3. I'll quickly rattle them off. If you're in Mississippi, you've got the nation's cheapest gasoline, the average $2.84. Oklahoma, Louisiana, Kansas, Colorado, Wyoming, Texas, Missouri, Arkansas, North and South Dakota are the only states left below the $3 a gallon mark. And you know what? Comparing this to a year ago, because I always like to get a context, still, Matt, get this, Colorado on average today is paying $1.09 less than last year. Of course, last year, the Suncor refinery in Commerce City, Colorado, was partially down because of cold weather. So that's why there's a drastic year-on-year improvement in Colorado. But Utah, 54 cents lower. Idaho, Wyoming, Nevada, areas of the Rockies that were impacted by that refinery also seeing prices a lot lower than last year. But buckle up. Spring training is here. And that means gas prices are going to start springing up. And this is going to last the next couple of weeks, Matt. So I know I will sound like a broken record, and you'll probably be, we'll probably be venting and commiserating about how our gas prices went up. But
wiping
one,
tears,
Matt. shedding tears.
Wiping some tears off my cheeks, normal.
Here was my proud moment this week, as I told you, prices down here in Florida were, I paid, the sign at the station I went to said $3.35. And guess what I paid through the multiple. Now, this isn't a grocery
your multiple
store
discounts.
Discount.
Yeah.
We'll go through it here, but this is interesting. Take a guess what I paid after some of the loyalty programs and discount programs I have.
$2.89.
I paid $2.67.
Oh my gosh!
And I made sure that I basically was running on fumes, and I definitely topped it off too.
Yeah.
So
understandable.
Yeah, it was interesting. I actually had signed up for a loyalty program that the first couple of tanks you get 25 cents off a gallon. And I coupled the Pay with Gas Buddy. I used my Pay with Gas Buddy card. That station had a deal alert that also saved me another 40 cents a gallon. So right there, we're at 65 cents. And then I had a loyalty program on top of that for the fuel brand. The Shell Fuel Rewards. So I got the station has a loyalty program. The brand had a loyalty program. They had a Gas Buddy deal alert, which if you have the Gas Buddy app, you'll see a lot of deal alerts. You need the Pay with Gas Buddy card. And then on top of that, I have the premium Gas Buddy product, which saves you at least 20 cents a gallon for up to 50 gallons. So if you pool that all together, I paid $2.67 a gallon. And I got to say, I felt pretty good about that.
I'm trying to, having worked for years in the portion of Tampa that you are currently residing in, I am very familiar with how many, I have probably pumped gas at every single one of those gas stations, and I'm trying to figure out.
Oh, you have, because it's not too far from your old stomping grounds.
From the old stomping grounds. I have a feeling I know, but I'm curious as to which brand name it was at this particular point in time. But that's cheaper than I'm able to get gas in Kentucky.
If you go to a beach, there's a lot of these on the in the beach. So I think that's pretty much a dead giveaway.
Yes, I believe so. I guess we'll leave the brand name out of there, but yeah, so wow. Okay, well, that's impressive.
I felt great. I got 15 gallons in a 15-gallon tank, which was impressive, and by the way, the interesting thing with those, Matt, is you can sometimes, if this is like the Kramer episode on Seinfeld, right, where they're basically on fumes trying to get as far as they can. If you really push the limits, you can almost always put more gallons in your tank than your tank. Now, keep in mind, there's
Say that
gasoline
one more
lines
time just to
and
make sure
filler
I
necks.
didn't have some sort of a glitch in my head.
Yeah, sure. So
more
if
gas
your
in your
car-
tank than your tank will hold. Is that what you just said?
Well, more than the tank is rated, meaning like if you look in the user's manual, it says your tank is, in my case, 15 gallons, and I put like 15.2 in because it's not just the tank, right? The tank, there's a filler neck that can probably hold another half gallon, and there's other fuel lines running to the engine, right? So the tank can hold that amount, but the lines that run between the tank and the filler neck, right, where you put the gas handle into, those generally are not added into the tank's capacity. So I actually had that, Matt, where I was astonished that I think in one of my old cars, I think it was a Civic, I pumped like a half to 2/3 of a gallon more. And I had never done that much more than the tank's capacity. So I had a buddy reach out to the station since he knew them and said, hey, when's the last time your tanks were calibrated? And they just had been. So don't always suspect that the gallons count is off. Oftentimes you can put more gasoline into your tank. So,
well, I know, for example, when my fuel countdown says I have 0 miles left to having an empty tank, I've still got usually a couple of gallons in there.
Oh, yeah.
There is that aspect, because I have freaked several passengers out thinking that we were suddenly going to sputter out of control onto the shoulder of a highway because it said 0 miles left. But I knew that there were at least 2 gallons left in the tank, which, is another 50, 60 miles that I can go. Now, I don't usually like to push it to that extreme, but, sometimes it happens. Well, especially if I'm driving through Illinois and I know that I can get to Missouri or Kentucky, where I can save about 50 to 70 cents a gallon.
That's exactly the way it went, Matt, because I refused to fill up, and my wife, and you're very familiar with Tampa, and you're probably very familiar with where in Tampa it says check gas Long Bridge.
Yeah, the Howard Franklin Bridge. Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
It's
a 5 mile long bridge. You have to.
So that's where my distance to empty was 12 miles. And my wife's thinking, okay, it's not actually 12. It might be less. But, to your point, when you do it enough, that, sometimes, and it varies based on vehicle, that, you might be able to have a gallon left or so when your car is screaming at you to buy gasoline, and you might only be able to put 14 gallons in. So everyone knows they have a buffer. And with my motorcycle, it can basically, it still estimates the range, but once the range is below 30 miles, it just starts flashing fuel. Yeah. There have been times when it's flashed fuel for 30 miles and I'm still only getting 4.2 gallons in. So every tank has a little bit of a buffer, right? And that's why manufacturers do that, because there are people like you and me that like to push the limits.
I mean, I don't necessarily call it a limit as more as I just really know my vehicle quite well.
You have a pulse for your vehicle.
Exactly. And this leads me right into my next conversation with you, sir. And that is E15 gas. I am a little confused on why the governors of the Midwest, multiple Midwestern states, including Missouri, requested to allow E15 sales. Is there a particular reason why they would do something like this?
Okay, well, first of all, folks that are, looking at your computer or your cell phone and listening to this on one of those, make sure you have a little bit of juice here left in your battery, because there is a little bit of an extended conversation here about, the particulars. And so this is a little bit, and even for a gasoline analyst, I had to, and this is how boring us analysts can sometimes be. I literally had to go to the EPA's, the Federal Register, to read the exact rule change to understand. And for those that don't know, all these changes that the EPA makes have to go in the Federal Register. In fact, I think almost any regulation subject to public approval or feedback has to be listed in the Federal Register for an amount of time before it becomes law or moves on. So I went into the Federal Register and read up on what's happening here. And let me just give everyone the cliff notes here. So E15, let me back up. E10 is the mainstay for gasoline in this country. That is 99.7% of all gasoline, regular gasoline, or I should say gasoline sold across the U.S. is blended with up to 10% ethanol. That's because the Renewable Fuel Standard has incentivized and basically pushed renewable fuels ethanol to be blended into gasoline. So now there have been studies the EPA has done, and essentially because of the summer gasoline program and probably a lot of rulemaking that spilled over, during the summer months, Matt, from June 1st through September 15th, E10 was getting a waiver of 1 pound PSI. Basically, summer gasoline, Matt, has to be 9.0 pounds PSI.
Right.
RVP, read volatility pressure. And those numbers are basically the distinction between summer and winter gasoline. Winter gasoline, the RVP is up to 15. Summer gasoline is 9. And if you're in a special area like a big city, like California, for example, the RVP goes all the way down to 5.99. So summer gasoline is not always the same.
Right.
But, Matt, what happens is this waiver applied only to E10. That E10 in the summer months had a waiver of 1 pound, meaning that technically it didn't have to be 9 pounds PSI or 9 PSI. It could be 10 PSI. E15 was not subject to that same waiver, meaning that you couldn't sell E15 in the summer because it did not have a waiver. So what these Midwestern governors did in the states of Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, Ohio, South Dakota, and Wisconsin, what they did is they proved and asked the EPA to rescind the waiver. And what that is going to do, and by the way, they had to prove that having the waiver negatively affected air quality, and they were able to prove that. So as a result, the EPA said, we find your claim valid that this waiver increases air pollution. And now, Matt, what this is all going to force is it's going to force refineries in these 8 states, generally speaking, gasoline that is used in these 8 states will have to be slightly lower in terms of that RVP number. It might have to be 7.4. So that then, Matt, means that if the RVP is lowered, that E15 would be allowed to be sold, right? Because instead of giving E15 a waiver, they're basically taking all the waivers away, which is going to force refineries to adjust.
Yeah, it's a fancy way of saying, yes, you can sell E15. It's basically a technicality / government way of talking and explaining, yes?
Yeah,
in a layman's
I think
terms.
so. It's one or the other, right?
Right.
Well, the thing here, though, the risk here is that now it's going to force these 8 states or gasoline sold in these 8 states to be slightly different than what's used outside these states. So imagine, I'll try and paint this picture rather simply. Imagine one big pool of gasoline, right? Anyone in any state can take from this pool of gasoline. That's what's ideal. Because if a refinery in California goes down, they can use what a refinery in Ohio produced. But that system doesn't exist, right? And now the worry is that for summer, Matt, instead of having, say, 1, 2, 3 big pools of the main gasoline supply, summer gasoline, we have a dozen different types of summer gasoline. So instead of one big pool, there's all these small pools. And those small pools, the gasoline in those can only be used in certain areas. So the problem is, with this legislation, the foundation, the kind of basis for gasoline has to be slightly cleaner for these 8 states, which, Matt, is in essence creating another pool, which is going to siphon off gasoline from all the other pools that exist. And when the system is running fine, it's usually not a problem, right? Because imagine a hose is filling all of these pools evenly. But when one of the, we'll say 5 hoses are feeding these pools evenly, when one hose is kinked, in the form of a refinery goes down, one of those pools may not fill up at the same pace, or 2 of those pools may not fill up at the same pace. So unfortunately, this rule is leading to additional fragmentation, which if you read the rule and if you read some of the news stories, very, very unsurprising is the fact that refiners represented by, I'm trying to remember the name of some
organization, but some organization that collaborates, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a collaborative organization. I mean, yeah, totally understandable on that.
I'm trying to remember the name of the group, but essentially, I think it's like American. Gosh, I can't remember at this moment, but yeah. So exactly right. The refining sector was represented by this group who basically warned that only having 1 year of lead time, because this rule changes next year. Only having 1 year of lead time is going to potentially lead to difficulty in phasing this in, because this is a new pool of gasoline, Matt. There are additional storage tanks that may have to be built to be able to hold the supply for this, right?
Yeah.
So generally speaking, the industry gets a couple year.
They get a notice, say, hey, you need to work on getting, making sure that you're able to facilitate.
Right. Exactly. So it is a little bit rushed. And on the other side, some of the renewable lobby is very disappointed that this isn't taking effect immediately. But the wild card here is that the Biden administration could issue waivers that allow E15. So again, going the other way, they could extend emergency waivers to E15 this summer as a stopgap until the cleaner gasoline is required next year.
So now let me throw this out there to more of a layman's term.
Oh, and by the way, Matt, I did
Yes.
remember it's the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers, AFPM.
Yeah, there you go. Some of our listeners are probably screaming that out loud because neither one of us were able to think of it. But now we know. We got it.
There's so many acronyms to
Right.
keep track of, though. It's like I was thinking it was a little different, but yeah, that's the one.
Okay, so let me ask you this. A little over a year ago, I was driving in Nebraska. Obviously, Nebraska's got a lot of corn. Let's just putting it mildly.
They do?
They absolutely. I stayed at I won't give the name brand of the hotel, but very well known name brand, and it was in the middle of a cornfield. And
I've definitely had the same in Western Nebraska. By the way,
I am not exaggerating when I say this hotel was literally in the middle of a cornfield. I am not exaggerating. My point is this: all of the gas stations there in Nebraska when I was driving and this was little over a year ago, already had E15 stickers on the pumps and said that the fuel that I was pumping into my SUV was E15. Now, I was like, well, that's interesting. I wonder if it's going to hurt and I'm like, nah, probably not. Modern enough vehicle. I'm sure it can probably compensate for the extra 5%, whatever the case may be. But I was very surprised, and yet I shouldn't have been, about one thing. My gas mileage went down by quite a bit, by like probably 4 to 5 miles per gallon with that extra 5% of E15. I don't know if that's normal. This is my question to you. Will motorists see less fuel mileage per gallon as a result of the extra ethanol that's being blended into the gasoline mixture?
On paper, yes. But Matt, as one who's driven regularly on I-80 in these areas of the Corn Belt, like Iowa, which is east-west.
Are they E15 as well?
Well, actually, I'll get to that in a minute. Yes, in some cases they are. The interesting dynamic here, though, is that on paper, E15 has just 5% more ethanol content than E10, right? Simple math. Not all cars see much of a hit. It does have lower BTU, British thermal unit, so it does pack less energy. But Matt, I think the interesting thing, you mentioned such a big hit, 4 or 5 miles a gallon sounds like 10 to 20% reduction. So what I've noticed when I drive in Iowa is, depending on what direction you're going, right? If you're going against the wind on I-80 for a long amount of time, I think that's the explanation, is that you're driving into the wind, because I've noticed a huge difference. If I have a tailwind, I can get 35 miles a gallon. If I have a headwind, I'll get 28 miles a gallon.
That is very valid. I can say that I was going in all directions at one particular point in time. And now, was I against the wind at every time? I don't know. I didn't throw an anemometer outside the window of the SUV to gauge whenever I was parked. But my notice is that the vehicle, and again, know the pulse of your own vehicle. My vehicle seemed to be acting and behaving differently. It did not seem to have again, finger on a pulse. So most people may not even notice it. But for me, I was like, this vehicle doesn't seem to have quite as much power, but yet it's very negligible. Like I really wouldn't have cared one way or the other. And as I kept looking at the gauge, I'm like, it's going down faster than it normally does, no matter my driving habits, no matter what direction I'm going with or against the wind. It just seemed to be different. And so obviously Missouri is one state that I travel in a lot, and it's one of these consortium of states that apparently will now be able to start selling E15. So I have so many questions, like, will all the gas stations need to redo the settings on their pumps? Will they, you know what I'm saying? Like, I have so many questions now, and I'm not sure we can get it all into one particular program.
Well, let's turn this episode into, we can focus on this because it is very timely. Talking about E15, especially because it's been in the news last summer and this summer, and because of all the things you mentioned. Now, there's a lot of common myths, and a lot of it is just simply people aren't as educated as much when it comes to ethanol. There still are manufacturers, Matt, that even their new vehicle models, 2023s, still may warn you against using over 10% ethanol. Most cars,
mine
can
does.
use it just fine. But when you're in a rock and a hard place, and by the way, the EPA says any vehicle 2001 and newer, it's okay to run. But you're in between a rock and a hard place, right? When your manufacturer specifically warns you in their user's manual not to use anything over 10%, I'd probably follow what my manufacturer and.
But how do you do that if you're in a state where they only sell E15?
Well, I've not come across that yet. Now back to the Iowa thing, because there was a new station that I visited. I don't want to go into the details, but I wasn't real happy as a consumer. Because, Matt, I had previously filled up there, and since, I'm an analyst, work at Gas Buddy, I kind of pay attention to what the pump is, what the warning labels are. And so I pulled into the station, and what caught me by surprise was that the octane ratings, right, the numbers you push, the 87, the 89, the 91 or 93, the 87 button was gone, and it was replaced by an 88.
Really?
And I kept looking around for the 87 because 87 is almost always going to be E10. But there was the octanes were 88, 90, and 91. And I'm thinking, well, this is messed up because I was just here. Where the heck did the 87 go? Because generally 87 octane is going to be associated with E10, and generally 88 octane is going to be associated with E15. And this pump was not the best labeled. And they have to be labeled. The EPA requires labels for E15, and they're orange colored, and they tell you, on it, that vehicles newer than 2001 can use it. But yeah, it was basically, Matt, I felt a bit duped because without much heads up, the specific station that I had been going to pulled the plug completely on E10, except premium. Premium was still 10% ethanol, but it was only 91 octane.
Yeah, there are some vehicles that require premium only fuel as well. And that's another question mark that could come up with the E15. Yeah, I see you.
Well,
wow.
I mean, that's a little different. But what I was going to say is my manufacturer says only 10%. I drive a Mazda. And so my manufacturer says up to 10% ethanol, okay, but not over 15%. And still my car was under warranty. And because I'm going to trust the engineers that designed the car, I left the station because here were my options were E15 for regular and for mid-grade. Both those grades were E15. Only the premium was E10, but premium costs 80 cents more a gallon.
Right.
So why would I pay 80 cents more? I literally went across the street. It was 2 truck stops, by the way, 2 that you've heard of day in and day out. I went across the street to the other station. They still had 87, which was E10. So I filled up there. But people need to pay close attention. And I followed this situation. In fact, I reached out because the thing that duped me, Matt, was that this station, the station that I pulled in that had 88 octane and didn't have E10, was advertising the price. The big highway sign just said unleaded.
Yeah.
And I felt a little bit duped because you pulled in and you're thinking unleaded's 10% octane 87 or 10% ethanol 87 octane, but I pulled in and there was no 87 octane to be found, right?
Yeah.
It was just E15. And the station had incentive to sell E15 because every gallon of ethanol right now generates what's called a RIN, a renewable identification number. And right now, those RINs have value because there's an increasing amount of ethanol required in this country. So for every gallon of ethanol that's produced, Matt, you get one RIN. And those RINs are then sold to oil companies, refineries that don't blend enough ethanol into their gasoline. And that's how the government's basically, enforcing the renewable fuel standard is you have to at least mix or sell enough ethanol, or you have to buy a renewable identification number to offset if you don't sell enough.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a shady experience. And, as an analyst, I didn't really like the fact that, the sign hadn't changed, right? They still make you think they have unleaded. And all I was, it was E15. And even more so, my motorcycle, I'm more worried about. The motorcycle specifically says nothing over 10 ethanol content. So I don't stop at that station anymore.
Right.
And they've been some of these stations have been silently adjusting. And that's what I don't like is surprises. I have no problem if you advertise very clearly that you want to sell E15. But Matt, it's very abnormal. And what you can do is if a station's only selling E15, hopefully you're not on fumes and you go to a station nearby that's still selling the standard. So, and honestly, I don't go back to that station anymore, and I very closely follow what this brand of stations is doing now because I felt a bit duped. So just a reminder, motorists, check the pump. Make sure you're, buying what you think you are.
And take, for example, I'm not going to mention the brand name of vehicle that I have, but I did just send you the excerpt. They recommend for my particular vehicle, an SUV, 87 octane rated fuel with an ethanol blend of no more than 10%. And I'm just simply saying, for me personally, when I had no other option but to put E15 in it, like I had no option. Every station within X amount of miles of where I was at, it's all E15 or was at that time. I did notice a difference. My vehicle did not seem to particularly care for this.
And
that
there's
concern,
a lot of differences.
I have a little concern about that. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. Absolutely. And to your point, I think my manufacturer's a little bit behind because they still haven't approved E15. I would like them to because E15 is generally 5 to 10 cents less a gallon. I'd like to be able to even check it out to see if the fuel mileage is similar. But I caution that, why would I, do against the manufacturer's wishes just to save a couple cents?
Do you and I have the same manufacturer?
We do.
I thought so. Okay. I think it has something to do with their injection method in the way that they. Perhaps.
There's ways around it, right? So,
well, sure.
So the interesting thing here is I've been an advocate for this, Matt. Is my motorcycles do need premium, and I am sick of paying 80 cents a gallon more. I really wish because ethanol tends to be cheaper than gasoline. I really wish that my motorcycles could take like an E30, which would have the octane of a premium, with the price differential, a cheaper price than regular, because the higher ethanol content you go, right, the cheaper it gets. E85 is generally the cheapest because ethanol has been reducing the price of gasoline. So I'd actually like my motorcycle manufacturer to require E30 because that's kind of like, it's kind of like a discounted premium. And by the way, this is why a lot of automotive tuners, I used to own a small displacement vehicle and I slapped a turbocharger on it and I threw a lot more air into the engine. And basically, bottom line is when you have an engine like that, you need higher octane fuel. And ethanol is about, if you use E85, I believe it's about 110, might be 105 to 110 octane, which is extremely high at an extremely low price. And so you see a lot of tuners that have this setup, that have a turbo, that are running a lot of horsepower. They will actually use E85 as a racing fuel because ethanol is cheap and it's good octane. So long story short, watch what you're buying. But I like the fact that consumers will have an option, Matt, because though my car doesn't really recommend E15 right now, there's a 10-cent cost difference, I'd
Yes.
like to try it and at least see because the EPA has done studies on mileage, they have found very little change. And it does depend on the vehicle and depending on the conditions as well. Because like I said, if you're driving west, maybe your lack of power was a really strong wind coming out of the west. And maybe that's also your hit to fuel economy.
I just, and for me, this is my personal experience. I'm not speaking on behalf of anybody other than myself. I just know that the engine sounded a tiny bit rougher. The power seemed a tiny bit less, and it was noticeably less in fuel mileage. I had to fill up because no matter where I drive, you kind of have that habit. Like I know I can make it usually to an X location before I need to fill up, and I felt like I was pulling a trailer behind me.
Well, Matt, you got to remember to turn your NOS on, right? Get the NOS.
You got to do something.
Back in the old Fast and Furious days,
right? So yeah, to me, it just didn't care for the fuel, and I had to fill it twice.
I mean, yeah,
I had to have 2 tanks worth, and it did not like it at all. And as soon as I put in and by the way, I did on purpose when I knew I was coming back into an E10 location, I run it down to fumes, and the moment I put E10 gas back in there, which is like a standard, it went back within just a few miles down the road of behaving normally. So I'm just
and keep in mind there could have been other issues at that one station.
Could have been.
I would always encourage, no matter, I don't really have a stance one way or another, but I would always encourage people, if you have a bad one experience, try it again somewhere else and see if the experience is the same, and try to remove some of those environmental factors that I mentioned, like wind speed, because it's amazing, Matt. If you're heading west on I-80 through Iowa, how much your mileage can drop. It really is.
Wet pavement also decreases fuel mileage versus dry pavement because of the friction difference.
More friction.
Yep.
There you go.
That I have found out in all of my driving as well. I'm just back at the point where I just need to put a fuel tank in my backyard. And there we go. I was
reading about those and is it going to be single walled or double walled?
I don't know yet. I don't know.
How many gallons? Because there is a shelf life to gasoline, Matt. I mean,
I go through a lot of fuel, Patrick. I go through a lot of fuel.
Oh man, maybe you should maybe the future, Matt. We can have an episode that you bought your own gas station so that you could. I mean, by the way, Delta bought their own refinery so they could get access to cheaper jet fuel. That's another story we could talk about in an episode down the road. How Delta Airlines owns a refinery.
Right. Well, that's kind of fun. Maybe I can't afford that. I'm not going to lie. That sounds expensive, but that sounds really expensive. Just throwing it out there. But you know what? One of the things that I know that we are basically running out of time on very quickly. Let's talk very quickly about the prices again toward the end, within the next several days. Where do you see prices kind of going from here? Do you see any spikes across the country as well?
Yeah. Well, I think as we wrap up, Matt, that we definitely see some upward movement, I think, across most of the country. I'm going to say that if I had to guess, over the next week, 40 out of the nation's 50 states will go up. So we're talking about most areas will go up. Price spikes? Yeah, if you're on the West Coast, if you're in Oregon or Washington, we saw prices jumping up there. The Great Lakes right now is actually the highest priced wholesale gasoline east of the Rockies, but we just saw prices go up there. So more increases than decreases, Matt. I hate to be a broken record, but it's the time of year. Let's round the corner and look forward to summer.
All right. Well, make sure you get your questions and comments and, complaints, whatever the case may be, to podcast@gasbuddy.com.
Let us know your experiences with E15 as well.
Exactly. Yeah. You can also get us on Facebook and X at Over a Barrel Show, either social media platform, as well as directly to Patrick on X at GasBuddyGuy or myself at Over a Barrel Matt. And there you go. That's going to wrap up today's episode of Over a Barrel. You guys have yourself a great one, and we'll talk again coming up soon.